Hi, this is artist Carrie Graber. Cheers from sunny Palm Springs. You're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guile. Have you ever wanted to visit a Frank Lloyd Wright house? In some states, there are at least a few to choose from, but in others, like Georgia, Maine, Arkansas, and here in North Carolina, not so much. For one pretty amazing Renaissance woman, an artist, a writer, an investment banker, film producer, tattoo artist agent, and economic development consultant, she had to go all the way to Iowa to visit one Frank Lloyd Wright house, and now she owns it, at least legally. As all Wright owners eventually discover, pretty soon the house owns you. Joining us today is the new owner of Frank Lloyd Wright's Alsop house in Oskaloosa, Iowa. She's Mia Reed, daughter of architect Chuck Reed. And now your host, who's also the child of an architect, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I've talked to dozens of children of architects who didn't follow their fathers and a few mothers into the architecture profession. You don't realize as a kid exactly what your parent does or why what they do is important. It's just their job, but it does affect you. I had zero interest in architecture growing up, or so I thought, even though I worked in my dad's architecture office several summers running old-school blueprints through a very leaky ammonia-based Bruning machine.
I don't even want to ask what that was.
We nearly passed out once, and only then did my dad consent to put in a fan, and all that did was blow the leaky ammonia around a little bit. My career in strategic planning as an executive coach had no relation to architecture, yet there were many times when I passed by certain modernist buildings that I inexplicably stopped the car cold and had to go in. This caused more than a few problems with spouses, as any member of a stylistically divided couple knows. Architecture gets into your DNA whether you like it or not, and one day it's going to come out. Mine did one dark and stormy night in January 2007. That was the genesis of U.S. Modernists, and look what it's done to me.
Yes.
No more management consulting, thank God. And I get to hang out for 8 years with my favorite rock and roll DJ.
Oh, thank you.
That's Tom, by the way. Like many architects coming up in the 1950s, my dad loved Frank Lloyd Wright. Notably the best-known architect in U.S. history, Wright died in 1959, but his influence still powers the dreams of architects and mere mortals, like me and our guest today. Wright inspired architects to think outside the box of traditional housing, to use space, structure, and scale to create not only a new look, but a new and wonderful experience of living. If you're a modernist fan who's married to someone who hates modernist houses, who thinks they are cold and unwelcoming, here's your plan. Book one for a weekend, and there are plenty on Airbnb and VRBO, and take that skeptical spouse. Bring wine and some pasta and sauce and bread and cheese, some Ben & Jerry's, coffee and eggs, and if you really can't cook, some Eggo waffles. Make your first and last meals every day in the kitchen. Let them experience how the space and the light makes the two of you feel. By Sunday, the brainwashing will be complete, and they'll generally say at a minimum, this wasn't so bad. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a timeless adventure that we are completely making up, realtor Angela Roll grew up in Estonia, the daughter of a former ambassador wrongly accused of spying on next-door Lithuania. He was cleared, it turns out, because Estonia only has 6 spies, and everybody pretty much knows who they are. After a night of partying with Le Corbusier's cousin, Boozy Corbusier, Angela took the ferry across the Gulf to Finland, causing an international incident involving a little red dress, a wood-turning lathe, the Finnish Coast Guard, and a $2,400 bar tab she accidentally signed over to Bjork.
Uh-oh.
Angela escaped the resulting media frenzy on a train to Denmark in the company of international man of mystery Eric of Aarhus, whom she later married. Angela then moved to North Carolina to become a real estate agent. Specializing in modernist houses, Angela advises buyers and sellers on everything, from appropriate renovation to shipping a wood-turning lathe from Helsinki. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or call 919-995-0550. Mia Reed has worn many hats: artist, writer, investment banker, film and TV producer, tattoo artist agent, thrift art buyer and seller, a consultant to artists and communities on leveraging their economic impact, and most recently, iconic house owner. Raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a family rich in creative art and architecture talent, Mia now owns Frank Lloyd Wright's Alsop house in Oskaloosa, Iowa. That's about an hour from Des Moines. It's a property that she's now restoring with an eye toward opening the house to public and community events. Gee, maybe even put it on VRBO?
Yeah.
She's also taken on the role of Creative Economic Development Advisor to the Oskaloosa community. Her goal is a Great Places designation from the great state of Iowa in recognition of Oskaloosa's art and culture scene. And there is one. Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, Mia.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
I should note, Mia and I met only 6 months ago. Although we grew up in Raleigh about the same time in the 70s and 80s. In this town, in a time with not that many architects, it's a miracle we never met back then. Because I knew of her parents through my parents, who hung out with them all the time. My mom was a fangirl of Mia's mom, Elaine, a prominent artist. And the two couples attended a lot of the same parties together in the art circuit, which was fused with the architecture and amateur theater scene, as it is in many smaller cities. So, Mia, before we talk about your Wright house, tell us about your mom and dad.
Well, they were married for over 70 years, and their names were Chuck and Elaine Reed, and it was actually pronounced as one word. They were just called Chuck Elaine.
Like Brangelina.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They were always ahead of the curve, always. They were too cool. I always say that they were cooler than I ever have been or probably ever will be. A lot of my inspiration, most of my inspiration, really. I mean, it didn't get any better than Chuck Elaine in the art world and understanding design and also having an opinion about design. They encouraged it. We didn't all agree in our family. My eldest sister is also a painter. So I was the so-called black sheep in the family.
Because you went into business and consulting type things.
Exactly. I was always the wheeler-dealer business one in the family. But I would like to credit definitely my mother and father for helping to shape the left and right brain that I am today. Dad was in World War II. And believe it or not, George, his desire was to become a surgeon. He wanted to be a doctor.
Really?
Yeah. He was all about it. And what's most interesting is I just had 1,000 photos developed at Christian Photo in Des Moines. There's a really cool
Yeah, it's hard to find a place that'll...
right? Yeah. And they do it all. They're so cool. It's like a hangout in there. And what's funny is it's a family name, Christian Photo, and it's in a church. I love that. I thought that was funny. But anyway, so I bring in all these rolls of film, and we were all hoping that they'd come out, and maybe the church had something to do with it, because they all came out. And there are 1,000 photos from the Philippines and other areas during World War II, quite haunting and fascinating. But what I noticed in the photos was my father's eye. And I sat on Father's Day, finally going through all the photos. My father passed away in in early February. I haven't had the ability to look through the photos yet, and I did yesterday, and they made me smile because I saw my father's eye, that he was really photographing the buildings.
Okay.
Yes, there was some very intentional perspectives and angles, and I thought, there you go. See, maybe he didn't know he was going to be an architect yet, during the war, but
the camera knew.
The camera knew. Exactly.
Why do you think he didn't get them processed until, now? You didn't get them processed.
Yeah, well, it's funny. My cousin and I spoke about this yesterday together because there were some other bizarre photos that were interesting. When Dad returned from the war, by the time he returned from the war, his interest in architecture did develop. And his stories of wanting to be a doctor and surgeon were shared with me upon several occasions. However, the architecture caught his eye and art caught his eye. And that may have had something to do with the times, too, because when the GIs returned, there was a lot of building going on. And granted, he was born and raised in Warren, Ohio. But upon returning from the Philippines, he returned to Hollywood, Florida, where his mother and father had moved to while he was in the Philippines. And the architecture struck him in southern Florida, as it does a great many of us. He went into architectural school. He went to University of Miami. He also went to Miami University in Ohio.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so they didn't have much money. He was a young buck. He was only in his 20s. And so I believe they just didn't have enough money to get all that film processed. And there it just sat in a box forever. But then there's also the thought, George, that because there were a lot of rolls of World War II pictures, I think much like many of the World War II vets, he didn't want to see the photos. Those were memories. Yeah, it was a sensitive topic.
As we're talking about Chuck Reed, you can follow along if you go to ncmodernist.org/read. You can start to see some of the houses that Chuck designed in Florida, which are amazing, Mia, and still highly prized in that area. Yes.
He definitely broke some barriers architecturally in the 50s, and it wasn't until recently, this is pretty funny, George, for some reason in my mind, because I was referred to in the family as the Tar Heel surprise, although I think we're all old enough to accept that there was no surprise to it. I was definitely an accident.
Yeah, that's a euphemism, let's say.
Yeah. Mother was 40 and Dad was 42 when I came along. But in my mind, Dad was always kind of that 50-year-old guy. So in the 50s, I just thought of him as being 50, but he wasn't. He was only 25 by the time he became the rock star architect. He was hot dad stuff. And it just occurred to me just recently, my God, he was only 25 by the time he was churning out some architecture that was highly regarded.
Tom, we might refer to Chuck as the Bjarke Ingels of his generation.
I always have it ready.
Thank you, Tom.
Chuck would love that. I think he just heard it.
Now, Mia, you've described yourself as someone who, and I quote, possesses a left and right brain partnership. Now, may I say right off the bat, having dealt with both artists and HR departments, that's pretty rare.
You're right.
Well, it's funny. Don Singer, AIA, down in Florida. Don was a partner of my father's. My father was his mentor. He said to me after Dad passed away, he said, your dad was always disappointed that you didn't become an artist. And I said, what's fascinating is that I believe that Dad and my mother came to grips with the fact that there was art in business. And I was constantly preaching that art always comes first. There's an art to business. There's an art to structuring things. There's an art. I mean, it's just too much of an argument.
I saw a book once called The Art of the Deal.
Yeah, who wrote that? I don't remember.
I don't have
Some
a clue.
loser.
I've never heard of it before, ever in my life. I'll tell you a better one.
Yeah.
The book that really changed my life was given to me as a gift by Christine Bacchus, the owner of Reader's Corner.
Right. Famous Raleigh bookstore.
Yes, it's a shrine, really. I was 27, and she gave me this book called The Dow Jones Averages, and the Dow is TAO. And it's the art of left and right brain investing, written by Bennett Goodspeed. It's out of print, but that is my Bible. And so, although I'd love to pretend that I'm the inventor, I'm not. Bennett Goodspeed really brought to light how important it is to get both your left and your right brain talking.
So you've had this, really great career in film and TV. You've been an agent. At some point, like with me, architecture must have, broken out of your DNA, because how did you start this journey to get to the Alsop house?
Well, it all started in 5th grade at Myrtle Underwood. Girdle Underwear. My 5th grade essay was entitled Frank Lloyd Wright, Rebel in Concrete. So, yeah, I was definitely an architect's daughter.
So you're saying a nerd. Frank Lloyd Wright was a brutalist?
She was portraying him that way, Tom.
Okay. I'm sure in 5th grade you knew all about that stuff.
Yeah.
It just still goes back to my mother and father. They taught me how to see the world and see art and see architecture, and they were very critical, and they would explain why they were being critical, why this doesn't work or that doesn't work, or oh, that's hokey, or oh, this is silly, or oh, that's overdone. And so really, I had a natural love for architecture, and I was always designing things on paper, by the way, for my father to build me. I remember sketching out this desk one time that I wanted him to build me, and it was over the top. It was insane. I remember him laughing. I put the drawing down on his drafting table. I said, "Here, Dad, this is what I want you to build me. I want this desk. I want you to build me this desk." And he laughed. Oh, yeah? Okay. And drawers all around it, all the way around the desk. There's all these little drawers and big drawers, and it was pretty wild. Actually, I did study drafting, and I did work as a drafts person for all of 6 months for a builder in Durham, North Carolina, but I'm too hyper. My brain's too busy to sit down that long and sketch things out, so I just sketched my life out in a different way.
Well, I get that, but what I want to know is, how did you get propelled into going to Iowa to buy a Frank Lloyd Wright house? Because you've been in North Carolina for so many years.
Well, I have been exposed to, of course, a lot of Wright homes and buildings. And I lived in New England. I lived in Connecticut, where there are quite a number of Frank Lloyd Wright homes. And I never thought in a million years I'd own a Frank Lloyd Wright home. I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina last year, and a friend phoned me and asked, what do you think about bidding on a Frank Lloyd Wright house? And I laughed and I said, that's crazy. No one ever owns a Frank Lloyd Wright house. It owns you.
As we said, yes.
And she said, well, I don't know. It's a labor of love. But the story was compelling, and I thought, wow, this might actually be a real shot, once-in-a-lifetime shot of owning a Frank Lloyd Wright house. so the rest is history. Here I am. I bid on it, and I won it. And I moved here on September 10th, 2021, and moved into the home around mid-October. It's been a journey for sure ever since. I am very methodical, and I was introduced to Stafford Norris by another Frank Lloyd Wright homeowner, Peter Manu, and his wife, Irmi. They owned the Lamberson house in Oskaloosa. And by the way, I have to mention this part of the story. When I asked my friend, my neighbor, where the house was, first she said Iowa. And I responded, Iowa? That's crazy. I said, where in Iowa? And she kind of dribbled out of her mouth, Oskaloosa. And all I could say was, where's that?
And it turns out that Oskaloosa is kind of a little mini center of Wright houses.
Well, it is. And there is a legend, a myth or legend, that Frank Lloyd Wright, that he was considering Oskaloosa as a new Taliesin headquarter. He was considering, as the legend goes, moving the Taliesin headquarters to Oskaloosa. Now, if that's true or not, who knows, but it sure is a good story.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's tell our listeners about the house. It was designed in 1947 and completed in 51. Designed by Wright and overseen by apprentice John DeCoven Kill. Constructed by Jim DeRoos. It is one of 7 Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian houses in Iowa. It's a 4-bedroom, about 2,300 square feet, with Cherokee red concrete floors and a wonderful cantilevered carport. What's even better is that Mia bought this house with a bunch of Wright design original furniture in the house. Oh, that must have been quite special.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Just incredible. It has a 3-piece dining room table that you put together. Right now I have 2 of the pieces together in the living room, and I used the 3rd piece as a table in one of the bedrooms.
So I meant they must be 8 freestanding pieces then.
Yes, they are. One of the pieces is a triangle. Well, I take that back. It's not a triangle. It's hard to explain that shape. One maybe 50-degree angle, and then 2 more sides. Okay. What would you call that shape? I don't even know what you
geometry.
Call
Let's just call it geometry.
Scalene, isosceles, I don't know.
Yeah,
hexadecimal,
exactly.
I don't know.
It's phenomenal. It's just incredible how it's a Frank Lloyd Wright shape. How about that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or I refer to them as right angles.
Oh, I get it.
And there are 8 dining chairs and 4 side tables and 1 bed. The master bed is a queen size frame. As the story goes, the previous owner's sister was the executor of the house. She said that there were countless number of auction houses, rather large, big named auction houses. We'll just keep them anonymous, hounding her for the furniture. They wanted to buy the furniture or auction the furniture. And true to her commitment to her brother, Harriet refused them and said no. It was her brother Gordon Bollinger's wish that the furniture always remain with the house, and therefore it will always remain with the house, no matter what. Once I complete the house, I will be putting the house into a foundation where it will be protected.
You get a preservation easement on it, for sure.
Yes. And the remaining 2 Alsop children, Jane and Reedy Alsop, gifted to me all the original drawings and blueprints, and there's about 40 in the collection, and all the original correspondence by and between Frank Lloyd Wright and the Alsops and Massalink and the Alsops. And so all of the archives will be protected and framed and will remain in the house, hung on the walls or on easels. We don't want to put holes in the walls.
Right. Yeah. Carefully staged in this house. Now, Mia, you moved there last year in 2021 and you've started a restoration process. Tell us about that.
Well, I was introduced to Stafford Norris III, who has restored Frank Lloyd Wright houses, and he exclusively only works on Frank Lloyd Wright homes. So I met with him. He came down from Minnesota, and he's a no-nonsense guy. He is quite the purist. He will not subscribe to homeowners that want to so-called renovate their homes, their Frank Lloyd Wright homes. There's a big difference between restoration, preservation, and rehabilitation of buildings and homes. And he knew that I was very serious about restoration and preservation as it relates to the Alsop home. We discussed, he asked me questions about what it was I wanted to do. And I simply said, I want to return it back to all of its glory. And that was when the Alsops gifted to me the drawings so that we could go by the drawings, the original drawings. A previous owner in the 80s, late 70s, sadly removed all the original windows and doors and installed white plastic Pella windows. Yes.
A very good window company, but not necessarily what you might want to put in a Frank Lloyd Wright house.
No. And speaking of Pella, my father actually did love Pella windows in the 50s. He said, I used Pella quite a bit in my homes and buildings. And I said, yeah, but these, Dad, are not the top quality Pella windows that you used. And I sent him photos of them, and he said, oh, those are terrible.
Did your dad get to go with you to Oskaloosa and see the house?
No, he never made it. My intention was to move him out here so that he could spend his remaining years here in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. But I suppose that certainly was a selfish plan of mine because...
Sounds like a wonderful idea.
Well, you're kind. What I came to grips with is you don't tell a Midwestern man what to do when he's 95.
Okay.
Because Dad really was a Midwesterner, by the way. But he did pass away sooner than what we had anticipated. He went peacefully in his sleep, so for that we were thankful. But yes, unfortunately, he did not get to come out here and see it. So Don and Elaine Singer, I speak to 2 or 3 times a week. Don has taken Dad's place in holding my hand as I go through this restoration journey.
Now, according to the Oskaloosa Herald, which is the world authority on architecture in Oskaloosa, you're planning to make the Alsop House a place for community events in the future. It's going to be more opened up.
I do. It's very much my commitment. I am also in discussion with Iowa State University Design School, Dr. Michael Moak, who heads up the Architectural and Design School. What I proposed is that we develop some sort of partnership where aspiring artists, all artists, architects, engineers, designers can come and in a very relaxed environment experience a Frank Lloyd Wright home. And in particular, the Alsop House, it's a rare Usonian home. What makes it rare is the enormous fireplace is on the exterior wall. It is not in the center of the home or on an interior wall. The living area is vaulted. It's enormous. And this is a very light, meaning bright, Usonian. A lot of the Usonians are reviewed as being rather dark, and they are. But this particular house, it has a different kind of energy. It really does. It's also elevated. It does not have the traditional style of introducing a terrace off the living area. where you walk outside. So the living area is elevated and there is no terrace. But I really want people to just, like I said, in a relaxed manner, enjoy being in the space and, spending a day, 2 days, 3 days. I do not want it to be a tourist spot per se, but I will open it to the public so that people can enjoy it. I wanted to mention, George, no one knew that the original doors and windows remained on the property.
Oh.
And I was walking my dog one day, and there's an outbuilding on the property, which surprisingly, I was looking at it thanks to my parents' training, and I was studying the structure, and I thought, well, it sure does look like a Frank Lloyd Wright design. I thought, well, it does have a Cherokee tent kind of banding around the roof. And I said, well, it must be mine. I have 2 acres here. And I opened the doors, and lo and behold, there are all the original doors and windows.
Awesome.
I screamed. Yeah, it was incredible. It was really like finding the Holy Grail. I immediately phoned Stafford, and he was thrilled, and he came down with his trailer, and we loaded them all up. And he is currently restoring all of the windows and doors.
The Instagram feed is FLW_Alsop, ALSOP_house. Mia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, George. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, George, take us out.
Wait, what? What?
Yeah, your job.
Okay. Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 15,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studio in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by me and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli kindly stepped up in the middle of her beach vacation to bat for rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino, still working deep underground on our top secret project. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm George Smart. Tom and I will be back soon with another genetically destined Apple Doesn't Fall Too Far from the Tree edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Don't give up your day job.